in March. That was the 40th anniversary of the public announcement that the U.S. is attacking South Vietnam, that U.S. pilots are bombing South Vietnam, that they began to use chemical warfare for crop destruction, started driving millions of people into concentration camps. This is all in South Vietnam. No Russians, no Chinese, not even any North Vietnamese, assuming they're not allowed to be in their own country. Just a U.S. war against South Vietnam, openly announced. No commemoration after 40 years, because nobody even knows. It's not important. If we do that to other people, that's normal. It's if they do something to us that the world is coming to an end. But if we do it to them, it's so normal, why should we even talk about it?
And likewise in Japan.
Yeah, same thing. Actually, it's better in Japan. Japan was defeated, and defeated countries are forced to pay some attention to what they did. Victors never are. I mean, take a look at the Tokyo trials. You know, undoubtedly the people were guilty of all kind of crimes, but the trials were a total farce. I mean, from a legal or any other point of view, they were disgraceful. And did anybody try the U.S. criminals? In fact, you know, it's kind of interesting the way Nuremberg, the way the principles were constructed. They had to decide at Nuremberg what's going to count as a war crime, and there was a very explicit definition, and it was conscious. You know, it's not hidden. A crime is a war crime if the Germans committed it and we didn't. So, for example, bombing of urban concentrations was not a war crime because the British and the Americans did more of it than the Germans did, so therefore it's not a war crime. And German submarine commanders were able to bring testimony in defense by American submarine commanders who said, yeah, we did the same thing, and they were therefore free because it wasn't a crime. So if they do it, and it gets even worse than this. I mean, for example, opening the dikes in Holland was considered a war crime properly. But in North Korea, a few years later, after the U.S. Air Force had wiped out the whole country, there was nothing left to bomb, they started bombing the dams. That's a huge war crime. It's much worse than bombing the dikes. It was described, but it was described with pride. You know, if you read the official Air Force history or the Air Force Quarterly and so on, they describe it in gruesome detail, but about what a great achievement it was to bomb these dams, to see the huge flood of water scooping out valleys and to see the rage of the people. So they're Asians who depend on rice. And, you know, here we're really getting them where it hurts. And, I mean, it's just like racist fanaticism, but praised. That's just a couple of years after they hanged German leaders who were doing much less than that. Do I simplify all matters by saying that the U.S. acts everywhere as an evil empire? Yeah, that would certainly oversimplify things. And that's why I pointed out that the U.S. is behaving like every other power. You know, so the U.S. happens to be more powerful, so it's therefore, as you'd expect, more violent. Yeah, everyone else is about the same. So when the British were running the world, they were doing the same thing. So say the Kurds. Let's just take the Kurds. What was Britain doing about the Kurds? Well, here's a little lesson in history that they don't teach you in schools in England. But we know from declassified documents, Britain had been the world dominant power, but by the time of the First World War, it was weakened by the war. Air power was just coming along at that time. So the idea was to use air power to attack civilians. They figured that would be a good way to reduce the costs of crushing the barbarians. Churchill, who was then colonial secretary, didn't think that was enough. He got a request from the RAF office in Cairo asking him for permission, I'm quoting it now, to use poison gas against recalcitrant Arabs. The recalcitrant Arabs they were talking about happened to be Kurds and Afghans, not Arabs, but you know, by racist standards, anybody you want to kill is an Arab. Poison gas was the ultimate atrocity at that time, you know, kind of the worst thing you could imagine. Well, there was this was circulated around the British Empire. The India office was resistant. They said if you use poison gas against Kurds and Afghans, it's going to cause us problems in India, which we're having plenty of problems. There'll be uprisings and people will be furious and so on. I'm not going to mind in England, of course, but in India they might. Churchill was outraged by this. He said, I cannot understand this squeamishness about the use of poison gas against uncivilized tribes. It'll cause a lively terror. It will save British lives. We have to use every means that science permits us. Okay? So that's the way you deal with Kurds and Afghans when you're the British. If we run through the rest of the countries, we're going to find the same thing. So it would be surely a mistake to describe the United States as the evil empire. It just happens to be the most powerful force in the world since 1945.